Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Asala's Classroom Talks. Today, we are privileged to host one of Africa's most distinguished legal scholars and global public intellectual, Professor Atiya Waris. Professor Waris is a United Nations independent expert on foreign debt and human rights. She is also a professor of law at the University of Nairobi and globally recognized for her expertise in fiscal law, taxation, development, and human rights. Prof. Waris has tirelessly advocated for African voices in global spaces. She has also mentored generations of lawyers and legal scholars, and she continues to challenge structures that perpetuate economic injustices, illicit financial flows, and inequality. In our today's conversation titled From Law School to Global Impact, Lessons for the Next Generation of African Lawyers, we want to focus on Professor Atiya's professional journey, her ethics, her courage, and how legal training has transformed her into a meaningful service for her nation, the continent, and the globe. You're most welcome, Professor Atiya Waris, and we are very honored to have you on the call tonight. And now I will pass the floor to you for a few introductory remarks before we get into this conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Evelyn, Dr. Asala. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. I have watched your podcasts and seen the amazing work and information that you've been sharing, and I feel very privileged to be part of it. Sharing my story it gives me a lot of pleasure also because there are questions that people have never asked me, and conversations that you and I have then as a result had, which surprised even me because there were things I'd never thought about. And I think that it's so much has to do with parents and family. So much has to do with being principled in all the spaces that one moves in. But I think sometimes also things are so accidental. Things happen, opportunities arise that one doesn't even imagine would come to one until they happen. And then when they're happening, you're faced with that decision of, what do you take this on or not? And so, yes, I'm looking forward to today's conversation, Evelyn.
Thank you, Prof. And to our audience, if you have any question or comment, please feel free to type it in the chat box. And once we are done with the conversation, we'll come to the question and answer and comment response for the last 30 minutes. So, Prof, to start us off, what would you say is your position today? Where are you professionally?
Yeah. So as a woman, I find sometimes I'm still like a serious minority in the room. As an African, even more so sometimes, right? Um, but I've done my inaugural lecture, so I've completed, like in a sense, I've completed that academic journey of becoming a full professor. It is such a privilege, and I'm now the UN independent expert on foreign debt, and that has been a real challenge because you go from writing things in your little ivory tower, in your little office, you're doing your research quietly by yourself, and then you don't even know if people are reading your work or not. And then suddenly you're thrown into a position where you have to take your years of research and reflection and actually respond to global events on an almost daily basis and an emergency basis, which is not something that academics are normally used to doing. We want to do long pieces of research and write and take 6 months.
Yeah.
But it's forced me to work very, very fast. And I have to just keep thinking and reflecting and coming up with ideas and solutions and making sure that even when one thinks up of original ideas, that one remains humble, because at the end of the day, you now go from writing pieces and now you go to actually motivating for why people should take on board your ideas. And these are not people on the streets, these are now sometimes presidents and ministers, sometimes, and it's global leaders. So it's in the past, I've had a lot of engagement with civil society, for example, and people on the ground, and now I have to, motivate on the other side as well. So it's fascinating.
Wow, thank you very much, Prof. I think just listening to you is an eye opener, to many of the experiences that our African minorities, yeah, especially women, go through whenever we get into these kinds of spaces, and how we just use every experience to motivate ourselves to the next level, of our professional careers. And then, Prof, what are some of the challenges as an African you may have encountered, especially being a woman, when you engage in these international institutions? And how do you then maintain your independence, your integrity in all these spaces?
I think naivety helped a lot.
Mhm.
I would come into these international spaces and I would
Mhm.
not presume that they would discriminate. And then when things would happen and they would be discriminating, they'd be like, "Well, but why are you doing that?" Like, that would be my gut reaction. But I have to tell you that I once asked Professor Madara Ogot how his mother used to handle issues. And Grace Ogot was a deputy minister, in early in Kenya's independence history. And he told me that
Mhm.
she knew she was in a space because she's a woman, but when she walked through the door, she would then stop thinking of herself as a woman and just be a player in the room. And that
Mhm.
actually has followed me because sometimes we will get into spaces because of affirmative action, right? Like, so people will say,
Mhm.
"Oh, we need more women in this meeting, or we need more women in the negotiating space," and then you will get picked not because of your specialization or because you are the top in the field, but because they are ticking the gender box, right? And
Yeah.
then that can be really disheartening because then when you get in the room, you feel like, "Oh, I've already ticked the box, so I can't speak." But the thing that Madara told me, and then, which is what his mom used to do, and I thought that was like, for me, that was brilliant. So the moment I walk into a room now, I don't think about the fact whether I'm female or male. I walk in the room
Mhm.
with my expertise and my knowledge, and then that is what I go in to share. That is
Mhm.
one thing that I saw as a woman.
Mhm.
But as a woman from a former migrant family, fourth generation Kenyan now, I not being a Black Kenyan, right? So walking into a
Mhm.
room, people don't also
Yeah.
always identify me necessarily as African. And
Mhm.
sometimes it confuses people. And then when I
Mhm.
say I'm African, then that confuses them more, and that tends to bring in conversations. But I have to tell you that people presume we're stupid. Like, I constantly feel there's an expectation that I'm going to say something that is illogical or doesn't make sense or silly or just not talk. And I feel that very often. And
Mhm.
people make you feel it in very subtle ways. And so again, I just walk into the room and I speak. And sure, I
Mhm.
may make mistakes, but then everybody makes mistakes. I won't be the only one making a mistake if a mistake is made.
Mhm.
And I just make sure I'm being human every single time. And sometimes you may hear me say this even in some of my lectures in class or in meetings. I will say, as a Kenyan, I will say that out loud because I'm going to make sure
Yes.
you're
Yes.
aware I am Kenyan and
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
African. Yes. And
Yeah.
as an African
And I'm
scholar,
sure.
yeah.
And I'm sure perhaps that's one of the questions that our listeners could be asking themselves. Is she African in the first place? But I'm happy that you have made the clarification,
Yes.
Prof.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So absolutely Kenyan first. Yeah. And then everything else. And then the specialization really, I think when you're professional and you're ethical
Mhm.
and then you're principled, like I've noticed that the more I'm in these rooms and then the more people keep hearing me maintain a certain line of thinking, the more I know that I'm in the room now, also because I have a certain
Mhm.
line of thinking. And they want that line of thinking in the room as well. And I think that becomes really, really useful. But it continues to be a
Mhm.
challenge, I think, for all women across the world.
Mhm. And one has to develop some shock absorbers and, so that you withstand all this kind of negative energy.
Yes.
So, Prof, when you speak to successful people like someone will tell you, I came to this point in my life, something happened, bam, and it was my turning point. I got into this intellectual direction. What was this turning point for you? What is this that happened to you that you felt, oh, now I have gotten into this space?
So it's actually something that happened just when I was graduating with my undergraduate degree and starting to work in a law firm in Nairobi. Two things happened. The first thing that happened was Kenya had a banking crisis, and a lot of people lost a lot of their savings. And amongst the people that lost their savings included my parents. My parents lost their pensions in that financial crash. And suddenly I was faced with this reality that, now they had to just keep working, right? And a lot of Kenyans, parents had to keep working, right? And then I thought, oh my God. And I was so grateful because, of course, I'd been a recipient of the scholarships at University of Nairobi to do my undergraduate degree. And then I start working, and in the law firm, the first law firm that I worked in, I end up actually supporting white collar crime and the bank directors of another bank that had crashed.
Mhm.
And and I was horrified that, instead of me supporting the depositors like my parents would have been, I was now arguing for and supporting the same people that had done this to another group of people, right?
Mhm.
And and then I watched the process, and unfortunately, the lawyer on the other side didn't pursue the case. So, if you're a lawyer, if you get 6 months or then 2 years and you don't prosecute your case, then the judge can dismiss the case. And it was a 1.9 billion shilling case in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, and it broke my heart because I remember getting the judgment. And even when the judge was reading the judgment, I was praying that he would dismiss my application because, of course, I argued this application for dismissal. And I was
Mhm.
praying that he would just dismiss me, and he didn't. I won the case. So I'm winning the case, but I'm thinking about these depositors that have lost their money. And I couldn't reconcile this. And then fast forward, I joined this legal project at the Rwanda Tribunal. And I make friends with the auditor at the tribunal, and I'm supporting the president of the tribunal to motivate to the Security Council why the Rwanda tribunal should get more money for prosecution, to hire more staff, and all the rest. And I was doing a comparative with the Yugoslav tribunal, which was getting a lot more money but
Yeah.
not prosecuting the same number of cases, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I was
Mhm.
preparing those Security Council research pieces. And of course, we wouldn't get more money. And I'd be like, what? We're more efficient, we're better, we're convicting more genocidaires, but we're not being facilitated to sort out the process. And so
Mhm.
at the end of that, I knew I had to go into human rights and like seriously. And I had to really figure out how to get financial systems to respond to
Mhm.
vulnerability and to
Mhm.
humanity. And it was this combination, I think, that pushed me in the direction I then took. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. And now let's look. I know you've told us after your university experience, but then let's look at your formative stages in the university. And I'm interested to hear from you, Prof. What are these experiences that you think shaped the intellectual person that you are and, informed the direction that you took um, eventually as a lawyer?
I I loved reading. I read every book in the library in the law school. So, this was when the internet hadn't yet begun, right? And so we had to go and read these
Yes.
volumes and volumes of journals. And I read, like I was there all the time reading, and I love reading. So I think that was really important for me. But
Mhm.
reading and thinking and processing and understanding. And I think that
Mhm.
that's a real challenge in today's world when young people have such good access to digital resources, which we didn't have then, but I find they don't really absorb, right? So I think when you read, you have to also think about what you're reading. You read a line or a
Mhm.
paragraph, and then you have to sit back and say, okay, so what does this mean? And I think doing that really helped me. But I was like in every club and committee you can imagine. I was head of
Mhm.
academics for the Law Students Association. I was head of the of SOLAR, the Students on Law
Yes.
International Relations. And then I
Mhm.
went for moot courts. I did the All African moot court. We were placed fourth. Went for the Philip Jessup moot court competition and won the Spirit of the Jessup Award. And I think I
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
tried to do as much as I could within the
Mhm.
academic
Mhm.
spaces that I could. But I have to tell
Mhm.
you that I had some pretty bad experiences with academic teachers at the law school when I was a student, including some who were
Mhm.
racist and some who lost our exam scripts. And like this used to be like a normal story. And I'm sure there are many people who hear this and
Mhm.
are like, oh my God, that happened to me. And I just felt like I should come back and do this better. And I think I've really tried. Like I came back,
Mhm.
I came to teach with an honest intention of trying to make the space better for students. And
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. So yeah,
Righting the wrongs.
yeah, at least trying to. I don't know if it's helped, sometimes, I look at it and I
Yeah.
think we still hear some of the same
Mhm.
problems and challenges. But yeah,
Yeah. Okay, but bit by bit, I think you make your contribution, and since you're focused, I'm sure in the end you'll see the fruits of your labor. And so, Prof, you ended up choosing this area of focus, which is an intersection between tax, development, and human rights. These are fields one would say are not very glamorous. But other than your law firm experience, is there anything special that pushed you to this path?
it was that I understood the maths. I think that was quite critical. So university had been on strike, and so there was an accumulation of 2 years before we even joined, and so I ended up going to do a CPA, which is Certified Public Accounting, and so by the time I got into law school, I knew maths. So when we did like accounting for lawyers, I knew what they were talking about, right? But I didn't
Mhm.
realize that most people, and a lot of lawyers when they would look at the figures or the maths, their eyes will glaze over. I mean, when I continue to now teach in the law school, I discovered that that's really something challenging. But maths fascinated me. Like I would look at tax legislation, even when I was doing CPA and I was doing income tax law. I would look at the legislation and I would be like, oh, so if I do this, this, and this, then I'll pay less taxes. And I remember the lecturer telling me, ho, 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 please don't talk about that in class. Let's just learn the law. Let's not learn how to manipulate it. But my brain was
Mhm.
already going there. Like I could see the loopholes.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I also think, and I did say this during my inaugural as well. So my brother is a medical doctor. And I remember him coming home one day and saying, do you know that if a child eats an egg a day, then they will have full nutrition, right? And I thought, what? Like, and then the maths part of my brain was like, oh my God, I can put a figure to that, And so when I started to look at like tax law and then development and human rights, for me, the thing that kept coming repeatedly to the forefront was how do we realize this? How do we achieve this? How do we make these things that are so amazing? The right to food, the right to health. I mean, these are not jokes, these are realities. I know in Kenya, there are so many people, and me including, who think, oh my God, I really don't want to get sick because I don't know how we're going to pay that bill. Like, I'm not ready to retire because my pension, I don't know what my pension is looking like, And this is
Mhm.
pressure. This is pressure on a human being who would be like thriving and growing and doing amazing things, but is so worried about their present and their
Yeah.
tomorrow, right? And so for me, that's what it is. I want to be able to look at the currency rate fluctuating, and you may never know I had my hand in it. But I've written a letter to the IMF and I've told them, listen, you need to sort out the currency regulation here because if you don't, this country's
Mhm.
children are not going to get an egg on the table every day. They may never know I
Mhm.
wrote that letter, and it's okay.
Yeah.
But if I can keep the currency rate stable, for me, that is what is important. And that's the work that I like doing. It's this how to keep financial systems stable so that people not only survive, but that they thrive.
Mhm. And yes, Atia, most of the work that you have done and are still doing, involves challenging these powerful economic institutions like the IMF, political interests. And one can easily then ask the question, what kind of skill does a lawyer require, when they are in your path of profession? And how does one cultivate this for those who are yet to get there?
Well, I mean, I already said we have to read, right? And we have to read a lot. So
Mhm.
I have to read economics. I have to read financial stuff. I have to read things on tax that are popping out. And then I have to read like economic indicators sometimes. Your breadth of reading has to be extremely wide. But at the
Mhm.
same time, you have to be able to draw the connections and the lines between them. So when I have conversations with economists, they'll tell you, oh, in this year there was an improvement in the growth of the country, and then in this year it went down. Well, I have to be able to look at the same data and say, okay, so if there was improvement in growth, what was happening in that country? And then you'll hear something like, oh, a new president came in. I'm like, okay, so that means they like their president. Why do they like their president? What is it that the president is saying? Sometimes you have to go down into their speeches to figure out what is it that brought the buy-in, that sort of pushed that economy upwards. And then when you go and speak to the leadership in that country and they're like, oh my God, our economy is now tanking. What do we do? Then I'm like, well, do you remember your campaign promises? Like there's a direct connection. And it's
Mhm.
so human, right? Like what we're talking about is human beings responding and reacting to each other,
Yeah.
that having this
Mhm.
financial effect and implication. And I think that you see that, you have to understand it, but also you have to be so gentle when you're communicating it.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
one of the things I've noticed is that if you're aggressive, that people will not listen, they will dismiss you. And if you only give people one option, they will also not pick your option. So what I have learned, and this is a skill lawyers are taught, right? To have legal opinions that have multiple options. So what I do is I always tell people, well, I think this may be the best option for you at this point in time, but I know that your country will take time in making decisions. So here are like 5 options. And when you want to implement, let me know and I'll tell you if it's the right time, because timing is also everything. But it's just also being very human with people. Global leaders are also human beings. When you talk to a president, you might find out that he's got a dog, or you meet a minister of finance somewhere and he's running, and he runs
Mhm.
like these are human beings at the end of the day as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And I'm sure, Prof, you will find yourself in spaces, where you make an independent choice, yeah, to protect the public interest, and facilitate the process of justice, as opposed to, being lured into the thought of making money, because quite a number of times we see professionals, not necessarily at your level, but when you get the opportunity, yeah, we see professionals luring off the path of protecting public interest and getting into the money making venture, at the expense of facilitating justice, the processes of justice. uh, what is this that makes you make the right choice over the lure of money?
Wow. So there's a beautiful Swahili proverb and I think I've quoted it to you before in the past. It says, "Riziki natoka
Mhm.
Mungu," right? Your
Mhm.
food is written, right? Like God is very clear about you know what you're going to get. And sometimes I joke with people who, we potentially think are corrupt, and I tell them, "Riziki natoka Mungu," right? So even the
Mhm.
corrupt money you've chosen to receive, yes, it's the money
Mhm.
that is for you, for sure, but you could have gotten it anyway, legitimately, because it would have been written for you anyway. Um, I truly believe that. I believe it like to the core of my being. I believe that God is going to sort me out It may not be easy, but that is the compensation I get for the work I do, but the work must be maintained under a set of principles. And I mean, people are different, but for me, that is really very core to the work I do. I don't believe that I will struggle like every other, middle class Kenyan in the civil service, but whatever is mine will come. And it takes time sometimes, but it comes. But I also think being able to sleep at night, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges that face people who are make challenging decisions for themselves, right? It's your decision. Whatever you're making is your own decision. I think if you cannot sleep at night, if it makes you think twice or three times, then you shouldn't do it because you're drawing a line, and then if you blur that line, then you're going to blur it forever, right? So holding on to principles is hard, but I also think that part of the reason I've reached where I have is because I am principled. People know what I'm like and how I operate, and they know the things they can and cannot offer. And then people don't offer. Like it used to happen when I was much younger, but now people will not ask me because I think they know I'll be like, excuse me, or I'll ignore them. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and Prof, there's a lot of pressure. I was yeah, in a class last week in Ghana, and one of the students who is a politician was telling me how he drives a V8. And I was asking him how he feels when he says this in front of the classmates who don't have or cannot afford this kind of car. And so there is too much pressure, yeah, for young African lawyers to amass wealth, to define themselves with money and wealth. How should young African lawyers redefine their success, yeah, beyond just wealth, beyond money, beyond titles?
It's that it, right? That's literally the rub, yeah? Is what is the definition of success? Um, so you can define your success as wealth, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think for me, it has been the egg on the table for the child. Like, and I say this a lot, and sometimes I don't know if people always understand what I mean by it, but I'll walk into a country and I'll ask myself, who's the poorest person in this country? And what do I have to do to make sure that when I leave, that poor person is it's going to be like even 1 inch less poor than they are today, right? So that's my measure. Right. So, and I'm happy to drive a nice car and I'm happy to live in a good house, and I'm grateful for it. But for me, that's what gives me job satisfaction. And I think you have to choose what your job satisfaction is going to be, which is not monetarily related. I remember going into class and talking in class, and then when you see the shilling dropping in the machine, that you see the realization dawning in a student that they've understood what you're saying. That used to give me a high because I used to keep scanning the class to see if they're understanding, right? It's more difficult now because the classes are so big, but that was what I used to love. I used to love seeing that, oh, yes, I get it. Oh my God. And then suddenly they're debating with you and discussing.
Yeah.
So I think you have to choose what is going to give you satisfaction in no matter what job you are, because people don't always end up in their dream jobs, right? But you have to choose that satisfaction on a daily basis. So what's going to be the thing that's going to be my job satisfaction today? If I do this today, is that's what's going to make me mean I'm happy? Because honestly, the world is burning right now. Some people are saying we're in World War III. Expenses are going to go pretty high in the country because of all the challenges happening across the world. So if you use money as the measure, yeah, it's going to make you kind of unhappy. Yeah.
Okay, Prof. And have you ever made a mistake in your professional journey? You look back and ask yourself, oh, I wish I didn't do this, or I could have done this differently. Have you ever had that kind of experience? And how did you recover from it, if at all?
I think that so I think these things have a lot to do with one's character. So when it's happened to me 3 times in a row, and I was so angry with myself about it. Um, so I wrote an article. I drafted an article with a colleague, and somebody heard it. And this person was supposed to be the editor of a journal. And they were from a very, very high prestigious university globally. And I was this young, junior academic.
Mhm.
And this this editor plagiarized my work. She stole my work. It was a woman, She stole my work. And she's from the global north. And I remember being so horrified. But this is something that was happening over a period of 3 months, and I didn't, realize it until she'd already published the article with our stuff. And the two of us were so angry. And then we reported it to the person who was leading the research team. And we were told, oh, okay, well, we didn't have rules on how to share credit. So I was like, okay, so then they developed rules on how to share credit. And then she did it again. And then I was like, wait, but we've got the rule on how to show credit, right? So now you've got to fix this. Um, and then I was told, no, she's too influential globally. And I did nothing, but I did nothing because I didn't know what to do. And the other colleague, now it was a different colleague within the group, she was mad. She was like angry like me. And I was like, yeah, but what are we gonna do now? What like, and then the lady did it a third time. And the third time I was like, okay, now I'm the idiot. Like, the first time you do it, okay. The second time I'm like, oh my God. The third time you do it, I'm like, I should have just shut you down the first time?
Mhm.
So now, when I am in a research group of people, I don't care who they are, we sign authorship agreements. And I
Mhm.
say it right in the beginning, and I'm never afraid now to say it. And I think it's also a developing country thing. We're very respectful, we're very cultural. And even if you look at global diplomatic spaces, they'll say, how do you know that the Africans are in agreement? It's because they don't speak. That's how we're in agreement. We're not going to voice our thoughts. But the reality is you have to voice your thought like straight away from the get-go. Because if you don't voice your thought, you become invisible. I didn't
Mhm.
I didn't know that at a global level that was what they were going to do to me. And that particular scholar has gone on to be like a global, world-renowned scholar, much earlier than me.
Wow.
Okay. And then, but here I am, the African who comes, slowly,
Mhm.
fighting to climb up the spaces, publishing like more than anybody else, to get into those
Mhm.
visibility spaces. And yeah, I would have done that differently. I would have called people out earlier.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Earlier enough.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have shared my
Mhm.
idea ever again when that lady is in the room. That was my mistake.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Good to hear that even those who have gotten there make mistakes. Yeah, and they would have done it differently. So we all can make mistakes. Yeah, but
Yes.
we need to learn from them and do things differently. Professor Atia Waris, do you have a mentor? And what role have they played in your journey as a profession?
So, like, I hate the mentorship question, by the way, because I think the younger generation, when they hear the word mentor, they're like, they have to come and it's an application process and you have to have meetings every month. So, I've never had what people would call like an official mentor, right? But there are people that I've admired over the years. And when I admire them and I admire how they're doing stuff, then I would emulate what they do. But I wouldn't necessarily have actually had a conversation with them, right? Or they wouldn't have actually sat down with me to say, here's my advice on this, and that. Um,
Mhm.
but there are like two people, of course, who for me are critical and always have been. And of course, I miss them dearly because they're no longer with us. And those are my parents. And even till today, sometimes when I want to make a very hard decision, I ask myself, what would my dad say or what would my mom say? For me, they have been a real like guiding light in my life. But I also had an aunt who was amazing, who used to teach in a public primary school all her life in Nairobi. And she was a tough lady, and she went through a lot, and I loved her dearly. And so she's been really critical. Um, and then I have to say my doctoral supervisor, his name is Professor Saul Picciotto. He's been incredible. He continues to be a
Mhm.
friend. and I continue to ask him questions. But he's like me. If I turned around and told him, "Oh, will you be my mentor?" I think he would just be horrified and fall down. Like it's the same way of thinking. Like, please, no, no responsibility, but happy to
Mhm.
talk and have a natural chat whenever.
Mhm.
Then
Mhm.
now I look for people for specific things. So, I mean, if I know somebody really understands how to talk to global leaders or how to access them, then I'll be like, hey, how do I get access to them? I will
Mhm.
talk to people specifically for the things I need assistance on. And then there's some who are really helping and guiding me, but they don't want it to be disclosed also, because there's also
Yeah.
that sensitivities around that as well. So there's some amazing African women out there, and they know who they are. There's some amazing women around the world whom I know. I pick up a phone and I call and I say, "Oh, I don't know what to do about this, and I'm thinking about doing this, and what do you think?" And so those are starting to grow
Mhm.
as well. And yeah,
Mhm.
and it's a real honor and a privilege to have people like that in my life.
Mhm. Mhm. And they're rare. They're not common. And so, at what point, Prof, would you encourage young lawyers to begin thinking of having mentees or mentoring others and contributing to the legal profession rather than, remaining to be mentees of other successful people throughout their professional life? What would be the best stage for a young lawyer to say, now let me identify certain individuals that I can also walk through the journey of this legal profession?
So, I mean, I think the same way I approach being mentored is the same way I approach mentoring, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
I did it, I help when I see I can help. I reach out and offer help, and I've been doing it, I think, even from my undergrad. Like I would see a first year or a second year, and I'd be like, try this or try that. Even that is mentoring, right? And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
as I've grown older, I try and look for young people. So for example, I've run like a informal research group at the law school. I send out calls for researchers and I
Mhm.
say, come do research. And right now I think I have like 11 undergrads in second year into third year who are volunteering
Mhm.
with me. And the idea is just to spend time with them and try and help build them, but also expose them to things that they wouldn't naturally get exposure to inside a classroom. And then I continue to do it all the time. And the other thing is, I, I have to say, I almost never, because sometimes I get busy and I miss opportunities. I almost never let an opportunity go. So if I cannot do something, I will always recommend somebody else. I will try and,
Mhm.
as much as possible, if I can, right? I'll say, please take this person instead of me. Here's another person who can do the task.
Mhm.
But also, when people will reach out to me and say, oh, we're looking for a master's student from Kenya, or we have a conference, and uh, do you have somebody you can nominate? I will always nominate. Like I will make effort. I will prioritize that.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
I think that that's important. But I have had people come up to me and say, you're my mentor. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Please stop that. I become very embarrassed about stuff like that. So, but I'm always
Yeah.
ready to help. I mean,
Mhm.
I've had 14-year-old high school students from Scotland email me, and then I've like had like an hour chat with them over coffee where they're asking me like
Mhm.
random questions and I'm trying to help, and I don't know who you are, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
So as long as I
Mhm.
have time. So I think for me, it's anybody who reaches out, please, reach back out. Yeah. Even if you're giving
Mhm.
somebody 10
Mhm.
minutes, give them the 10 minutes.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I think if you can bring people together and try and share what you have, I think it's
Mhm.
never too early and it's never too late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there is no timing. What I'm getting from you is that mentorship has got no timing. You can do it at any stage of your professional development or the, at the echelons of the profession. And it happens in different ways. It can be active, it can be in very subtle ways that even the mentor themselves may not be aware that they are mentoring someone, which is quite interesting. And it's also a very selfless journey. Yeah, if you want to be an effective mentor. So those are great lessons that we are learning from you, Prof, tonight. And so maybe, Prof, supposing you're speaking to a first year law student here in Africa today, what is this single lesson you want them to carry with them throughout their career journey?
Oh, read and then think about what you've read. And then listen and then think about what has been said to you. Like I think it's this process, it's that slowing down your mind to do the reading and then the thinking about the reading and then the listening and then thinking about what you've heard and not being afraid to reject what you're reading and not being afraid to reject what you're listening to, because I've never forgotten that horrible phrase you learn in first year law school. Law is not just. I'm like, that is
Yeah.
nonsense. Law is supposed to be just. So, if you go into first year law school and then you're told law is not just, and you're being told by this some philosopher who's now some dead person, law is not just, then you're already presuming that law is not going to be just. But why? Why should we presume that? Law should be just, right? So we should put things into their context. And I remember the other one was law is nonsense on stilts. Come on, man. No, we don't want that. We want law that makes sense. And I think that for me, that's the conversation. So read, understand it, think about it, beat it into shape, and form your own opinions. And I love the jurisprudence class. I have this one favorite undergraduate jurisprudence class I did a couple of years ago. And I said, we're on a desert island. So if we're on a desert island, and then I'm teaching you the law, like a philosophy or a tax, then you have to ask yourself, does this make sense on this desert island? Okay, and then we add this type of person and that type of person and this type of business, but we're still on the desert island, right? It's a blank slate, tabula rasa. And what is that adding into that space? And I spent that whole semester adding each philosopher into the desert island and asking them, okay, do we like this guy? Do we not like this guy? And it was really amazing. So that's what I would say. Reflection,
Okay.
reading, thinking, and disregarding, but with rational thinking. Yeah.
And would this be the same advice you'll give to a young graduate, who has just begun the professional journey?
Yes, I think so. But also be open to learning. I think when we finish law school, I think we come with some confidence and a little bit of arrogance sometimes also, right? That we now know.
Yeah.
But actually, we don't know. We've just started to know. We're learning to know, And I think even till today, even today, I learned something new. Every day is a journey in knowledge, and I think that be open to knowledge and learning. Be open to things being different from how you understand them. Don't be afraid of being wrong. Don't be afraid of being told you're wrong. And even if you reject it in like, someone tell you you're wrong, you're like, no, it's okay, but go home and reflect on that, because I think that is the only way we will learn and grow. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and what about this young African lawyer who is dreaming that one day I pray to my God that I occupy or I walk into the footsteps of Professor Atia Waris?
Yeah. Wow. I tell you, there are so many accidents in life, so I hope you have the same accidents I did. On a serious note, um, but I think they will be better than me. I don't want to be people to be like me or as I want them to be better than me. I want
Yeah.
Africans to occupy the spaces out there in the world with with the with a calm but very clear understanding that they belong and that what they bring in that space is something of value. Um, I would tell them, don't give up. Like, I think that was something that really helped me. Don't give
Yeah.
up, and then don't reject suggestions. Uh,
Mhm.
I remember, I remember wanting to do, I think it was a job, and then they were like, oh, but this is an administrative job. And I was like, no, no, but that's okay. I want to learn how to do this admin, stuff. And I ended up being a bit of an administrator at a certain point in time. And then I thought, okay, then people will think I'm, an admin person, and oh my God, I have a law degree. We have those hang-ups, right? But I think
Yeah,
just
yeah, it's true.
be flexible. Right now, you
Mhm.
can be fixing computers and IT, or I had a student who was a plumber while he was doing his law degree. Just be open to all sorts of experiences because they end up finding their way there. And
Yeah.
I would never have imagined that doing a CPA was going to help me as a professor because I was going to be a professor in fiscal law, right? Like I would never have imagined that when I was like a 20-year-old. But it's what helps me do the maths. So the
Yeah.
openness remains to be, I think and that path, allow it to also chart itself. And I think sometimes things look like they're not connected, but then they'll find their way.
Mhm.
Because I did one master's in business and commercial law, and then I did another one in human rights law, right, at Pretoria. And then I ended up doing my PhD in linking tax to human rights, So my two
Mhm.
spaces came together so beautifully.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
could not have designed it better if I had imagined it. And I think there's like a hand of God in that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and then don't let people tell you that the area is saturated or full. Like in tax, they were like, oh no, but there are no people in that space.
Yeah.
I'm the only professor of fiscal law on the continent. I mean, that's so terrible. We need more. There's opportunity, I think, for everybody and anybody. There's no austerity, there's no scarcity. Take it out of your head. In the world we live in,
Mhm.
there's a space for you in whatever field you'll end up choosing or being in. And then
Mhm.
you'll just find yourself in a space you never imagined. I tell people I'm an accidental
Mhm.
diplomat. Never would have imagined I would be doing global diplomacy and negotiation with the governments.
Mhm.
When I did a
Mhm.
law degree at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. And so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So nothing happens by accident. Yeah, every experience ends up filling the jigsaw, and eventually you end up to be, fulfilling your destiny. And our destinies may not be exactly the same. So that's what I gather from you, Prof. And just an amazing lesson, and many lessons that I have learned from you. And I'm sure the audience has also learned quite a lot. And now, Professor Atia Waris, the UN independent expert, is this over for you? Or should we sit back and wait for something more?
Well, I'm rapporteur for another year and a half, so I will be done with that role about August of next year. And I'm already thinking about next steps. So no, I think I'm 52 years old. I think there's plenty more to come. I
Mm.
wait to see. In Kenya, professors retire at 74 now. So clearly my country thinks I have a lot more time left in me, which is like another
Mhm,
24
mhm,
years. Um,
mhm,
but I remain upbeat and excited. I think that there's so many opportunities
mhm,
in the world to do things. And there's so many exciting things to think because I think that the greatest joy of being an academic or a researcher and a thinker is that when you're faced with new problems and dilemmas, you have to come up with the solutions to them. And we're in a world with a lot of problems. So it means it will
mhm,
keep me
mhm.
busy
True.
for quite a
Yeah,
while. So yeah, watch this
yeah,
space and yeah, who knows?
yeah. And we wait. So thank you very much, Professor Atia. We continue to wish you the very best. We are proud of you whenever you walk into these spaces, and we continue to applaud you and just to cheer you on, and truly hope that God will continue elevating you to the highest point ever. And so we've come to the conclusion of this conversation, and now we will turn to the comment section for the comments and any question. First, we have a comment from Shayla. It's another beautiful Monday to learn from brilliant minds. That's a comment. Um, and she has a question. Prof, how do you compare the days when the internet didn't exist to now? And what do you think stands out?
Wow. Gosh, sometimes I really hate the internet.
Mhm.
As a lecturer, I feel very sad. I really struggle sometimes because I find that students plagiarize a lot. But the one thing that stands out the most for me is that there is like it's like students don't care. Like I remember doing assignments in writing because we never even had laptops. Like who could afford a laptop in my time,
Yeah.
right? We used
Mhm.
to handwrite our assignments and submit handwritten assignments, and
Mhm.
I'm delighted that you can now type them out, so I don't have to struggle with reading people's bad handwriting, for example. So that's
Mhm.
definitely
Mhm.
a plus point. But I think what I struggle with is that inability to then actually write. Like I receive assignments sometimes that are 2 paragraphs, and I'm so shocked because it's an essay, and an essay for me is not more than 3 or 4 pages, right? And I didn't think that I had to tell a student this, right? That you need to actually debate and discuss this out, which is why I talk about the read, then the think, then the reflect, then the, sit
Mhm.
back, absorb and debate. I think that's the biggest challenge that we're facing. But I also think
Mhm.
it's the falseness of information that's online. That also has been a real challenge for me.
Yeah.
But I think the worst part is most of the information online is actually information from the global north. And so you'll find students are quoting cases in the US, but they won't know Kenyan cases or even African cases. And that still needs you
Mhm.
to go sometimes into a library, or it needs you to go to the specific website of, for example, the Law Reporting Commission, for example. And so I find that the the ease of doing things online also means that there is this lack of eagerness to really dig and search. And I find that it's across the board. I don't often find a student who will give me something and I'll be like, okay, you read, you really read. I think that's
Mhm.
sad. And then
Mhm.
my fear is what happens when these young lawyers start practicing, and you already start to hear things like AI is generating pleadings. So if you take the full circle, then it's about ethics and honesty and principles. And I think that's what
Mhm.
is going to control you in this AI generation it's so easy to access. So yeah.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Then Sheila also says, riziki inatoka Mungu. Even the Bible says that we pray like this, give us this day our daily bread, meaning our daily provision is dependent on God. Emoit, a very enriching conversation, loving every bit of it. Thank you, Doc and Prof, for taking time to mentor and impact the next generation of lawyers. Sebastian, thank you, Prof. Any advice for mature law students?
Oh, wow. Mature law students underestimate how much knowledge they have. That's what I find.
Yeah.
I love having mature students in the class because they come with the experience and the knowledge. I would encourage mature students to talk and engage in class, but also to
Mhm.
talk with their younger classmates. I think that is really important. That's one. But the other thing I would tell mature students to keep in mind is that um, it may get more difficult because of commitments and all the rest. But your efforts are always very, very they tend to be more effective because you're juggling with so many things at the same time. And
Mhm.
I'll tell you, in my spaces of tax and finance, the more mature you are and the more experience you have, for example, in like business and the world, actually, the better you are at taxes and the better you are at understanding the fiscal system because you're in it, you're absorbing it on a regular basis. And I would say never give up on your dreams. Don't ever give up. It doesn't matter. You're never too old for anything. Yeah. I mean, even now I'm learning another language. I have started learning Chinese. So eh, I'm now a mature student in a class somewhere.
Yeah, actually, and knowledge has got no end. And yeah, quite impressive, Prof. And I've also noticed how enriching adult students are during their classes, and they have this, immense experience and knowledge, and they make great contributions. Sometimes, and they even challenge you, yeah, to think in a different direction. So, yeah, I think these are the kind of people that you also need to elevate in those spaces whenever a chance arises. Another question from Karen Hauer. And what of mature older students with a gap in their academia, like unemployed ones? How do you deal with that in your space, Prof?
Yeah, so I often think that the ones that have been unemployed for a while have taken a bit of a beating on their confidence. But I will tell you that all over the world, including when I was studying in the UK and when I've taught in other universities across the world, the unemployed usually come back into school because you kind of feel like you need to do a top up of something before you go back out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So my
Mm-hmm.
answer with those that are unemployed is you're actually in a very interesting position. So someone like me is always looking for researchers, but I can never find researchers. But if you're unemployed and you're back in law school, you should actually come and talk to academic staff because they might have research projects where they can take you on board because you can do a part-time task while you're doing your full-time work. So I really think that it's converting it into a good, right? It's converting your time into what is positive. But
Mm-hmm.
also, you know, I know they need jobs. Often they do need some kind of job. So that's one thing that I look at. The other thing I would tell you is look for part-time jobs, and that works too. And I remember a friend, two friends who used to work with the same job. One used to go in the morning, the other one used to go in the afternoon. So they went and secured a job together, right? So it was so innovative. I thought it was so smart. And that was because you know how university is in and out of session all the time. And at a certain point in time, one would be there 3 months, the other one would be there 3 months. So I think that's important. And learning online, I mean, and if you can't go to school, I mean, if you can't afford to pay for tuition, there's so much knowledge online now, reading and learning and listening. So yeah, and don't make yourself feel like there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important. It's just
Yeah.
the test that you have to go through at that point in time of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I'm
Well,
sorry
thank you, Prof.
it's happening, yeah, to whoever it is
Yeah,
happening.
I think let's now turn to our final questions from Emoit, the African historian. Thank you,
Mhm.
Prof. I would like to hear from you what your thoughts are on whether it's possible to have an integrated legal system on the continent in the future.
Yes, it is possible. And I'm one of the people pushing for it, at least in my fiscal spaces. So, we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement in place. We have the African Union in place. We have an African Commission. We
Yeah,
have an African Court. We have an East African Parliament. We have a Pan-African Parliament. So,
yeah.
but I think what people don't realize, there are like about 200 countries in the world and 55 of them are in Africa. So that's a big chunk, right? We're like almost double the size of the European Union when it comes to number of countries. And
Mhm,
and so it's going to take time. So I think that there is a plan to move towards a union of African states. I think it's a very important
mhm.
one. And I think we're going to have to learn to get over certain things like we struggle with language across borders and we fight each other. Like we don't let lawyers
Yeah.
practice across borders and stuff like that. And that's going to happen for a while, so
Mhm,
that's fine. But I think there is this constant push all the time. So we've got regional blocks also going, ECOWAS, COMESA, East African Community, the Organization of the Great Lakes, there's the Organization of the Sahel, there's the Maghreb. And I think we've got to keep bringing them together. And I think it
mhm,
is something in process, right? And I think it's really important to keep it in mind. And I wouldn't be
mhm.
surprised. Somebody actually asked me this today by 2050 what I see. And I said by 2050, I think I see united regional, for example, financial system with the fiscal laws and all the rest. I don't know if everything will happen, but I certainly see the direction in that one. And I think it's a good one. I think we should stop wasting money by transacting with other countries just to get a transaction from Kenya to Nigeria. It goes through, the United States. What a waste of money, right? Literally, what a waste. Let's move our money straightforward.
Yeah.
So there's a clearinghouse being set up in Uganda, and we need our private banks to put those the SWIFT equivalent numbers onto the RTGSs, Those are things that we need to move on as well. So we need to make sure that all stakeholders are having buy-in into this this idea of making law and life simpler. Yeah. So we can move around more easily across our beautiful continent. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a step at a time. And
Yes.
hopefully in the near future, we will have a unified legal system as Africa. What a great achievement. Now, this brings us to the end of this conversation for tonight. Thank you very much, Prof. It has been such an honor just listening to you and learning all these lessons. I have no doubt that our audience are also, just wowed by the immense wisdom and knowledge they have been able to gather from you. And so perhaps I can just let you give some concluding remarks, and then we close the meeting.
I just think that do whatever fulfills you, and enjoy what you're doing. And yeah, and as much as we love talking, which I also clearly do, I think so important to listen to everybody and learn from absolutely everybody, because everybody has something to teach. I think that would be my closing. Thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you very much, and God bless you. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.